Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad.
Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. These biblical words say, look how good it is, how beautiful it is to come together. Today we come together for a somber and sad reason. We come together weighed down by grief and by loss. Nonetheless, the wisdom of these biblical verses is that there is a power, a beauty, and a goodness in coming together as we do at this time to pay tribute to our beloved Michael Hirsh, to remember his beautiful soul and the extraordinary legacy he leaves behind. We all are destined to die. We share it with all who ever lived, with all who ever will be. Cry for the dead. Hide not your grief. Do not restrain your mourning. But remember that continuing sorrow is worse than death. When the dead are at rest, let their memory be a source of peace, and be consoled when the soul departs. Today we remember Mike and join our hearts together to give comfort and strength to his family. Mourning is a time filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. We begin our service with a recitation of psalms and prayers, thus linking Mike's life with the millennia-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. And life is a journey from childhood to maturity and youth to age. From innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing. From foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom. From weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again. From health to sickness and back we pray to health again. From offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination. And life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. L'kol zman v'et, L'chol chefetz tachat hashamayim. Eit laledet ve'eit lamut, eit lata'at ve'eit la'akor natua, eit la'arog ve'eit li'arpo, eit lifrot ve'eit livnot, eit livkot ve'eit lischok, eit sefod ve'eit rakod, eit la'ashlich avanim ve'eit kenos avanim, eit lachavok ve'eit li'archok mechabek, eit levakesh ve'eit la'abed, eit lishmor ve'eit la'ashlich, eit likroa ve'eit litpor, eit lachashot ve'eit ledaber, eit le'ahov ve'eit lisno, eit milchama ve'eit shalom. There is a time for everything, a time for every experience under heaven. A time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting, a time for destroying and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering, a time for embracing and a time for refraining, a time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for tearing and a time for sowing, a time for silence and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar binotesh sheyar bitzeni, al me menachot yinahaleni nafshi yeshovev, Yancheni v'maglei tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki yelech b'geitz al ma'avet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha mishantecha hema yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sororai. Dishanta v'shemen roshi, rokosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai le'orech yamim. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. And let us say, Amen. Esaenai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Esaenai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim va'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai ose shamayim va'aretz. I turn my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from Adonai, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way, your guardian will not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Adonai is your guardian, your protection at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. Adonai will guard you from all harm. God will guard your life. Adonai will guard your going and coming, now and forever. And we say once more, Amen. We pause for a moment of reflection, meditation on the meaning of life and death, of love and loss. And now we turn from the ancient wisdom of Torah to the Torah of Mike's life. Dave, I would invite you to come forward at this time and share a reflection with us. Mr. George, right here.
Of course, my mother started with slowly. I'm Dave Hirsh. I am Mike Hirsch's son. And first, let me say thank you so much for coming. I'm very happy to see you all. And for those online, thank you too. I guess the camera said thank you too. Most especially my Aunt Sandy Golding. Love you, Aunt Sandy. So thank you all also for the texts and the emails and the memories, the calls and the visits. It's absolutely unforgettable, quite uplifting. So thank you for all these things. I'm going to start this conversation for a moment the way my father started the day with my mother. So you can act it out with him speaking first. Good morning, beautiful. Hi, handsome. They would say to one another. And I think it's only fitting maybe to do this. Good morning, beautiful. Hi, handsome. To my dad. So eulogies can take many forms, and sometimes they share biographical information. My dad was modest, so he probably would prefer not to have a full recounting here. Plus, it's in the obituary, so you can read that if you seek to. I want to say, though, that I do appreciate all that he achieved, but his story really is more about the hard, quiet work he did to get there. So, but instead of biography, I'm not going to do more biography. I'm just going to prefer to share a feeling of my being grateful for my dad and grateful to my dad. And I hope to convey that feeling of gratitude and hold on to it. So, in my gratitude, I hope to remember three things. I don't want to be too Socratic here, or too pedagogical here, but try to hold three things. One, he gave people a feeling of comfort and support. He was present. He came out to do things, and he was fully present when he was with you. Two, he had a combination of restlessness and contentment. And I think this combination is what led him to be productive and fun. He was private, but he made many efforts, especially to connect deeply with people he cared about. Three, he was genuine. He was genuine in some clumsy ways, and he was genuine in that most refreshing way as well. So you got the three things? That's the comfort and support, the restlessness and contentment, and the genuine. And together, these things add up to a person who was deeply, deeply loving. So first, I want to think about the comfort and support. I know that we all experienced my father, Dad, Mike, Dr. Mike, in so many ways, but I suspect we may share a common feeling about him. He was sort of a child whisperer, a person who loved taking part in the lives of young people, his own children, his grandchildren, and our friends, our cousins, his brothers and sisters-in-law, of course his sister, and absolutely his beloved patients. He really had an unusual ability to support and comfort children and their parents. Although I have to say, as to this comforting the parents thing, sometimes there were dinner time moments where most of us would be just, you probably don't talk to someone on the phone like that when they're the parent of your patient, but usually comfort children and their parents. Some of you can imagine him in a medical office, perhaps as a patient or a parent of a patient or as a student. Others will hear that booming voice while you are on the field or on the mat. I do want to just stop and say that Brighton wrestling was something he deeply, deeply admired. And there was if any of my wrestling friends are here or watching, I will say there was a notion, of course, that we had about you leave it all on the mat. And to be sure, my dad left it all on the mat. Some of you will also remember him in the corner of a party that he was trying to escape. And most likely, he had one appetizer in the mouth and one in each of his hands. He may have been at a friend's pool or a lake or a pond or at our kitchen table or in our family room, if it was the family room the ball game was on, or in our backyard or at the Cape or on country roads, or not exactly country roads, in southwestern Pennsylvania. The place was definitely not the point. The steady, comforting presence, that was his gift. So let me think a little bit about the restlessness and the contentment and the fun and the connections. So we had field trips to Harris Seed, like to a seed company. I can certainly smell the fertilizer. Or to the Ward Rock Dump, mica, obsidian, galena, quartz. We knew them all. To Letchworth State Park, to the railroad cut with the fossils. We had more adventures to Chautauqua and Cape Cod and Port Charlotte and Sarasota and the coal yards of Pennsylvania. Adventures upon adventures, and we super enjoyed our time with our cousins and the friends. There was always somebody young in tow with us. I can picture dancing in a circle in Jerusalem, which is a very good image. And I can picture going to Hawaii for his 50th, which was a great feeling, until you consider that he was the person who was always picked to come up to hula, and I'm still thought blocking that, I have to say. He was always the one picked, and we were always the one going, oh, no, don't pick him, don't pick him, don't pick him. Most common, though, were the basic joys, like trips to the basement, or the garage, or the backyard, or certainly to Mendon Ponds Park. It went a little like this. Let's get our boots on. Boots on. Eventually we get the boots on. Don't forget the bird seed. We'd hop in the car, we'd drive down Clover Street to Mendon Ponds Park, we'd go to the birdsong trail and get to that spot among the fir trees, and he'd say, hands out. And he'd help your hand out. And he'd pour the bird seeds into my hand. And then they came, the chickadees. And he identified the different birds that were popping into my hand. I could feel the pecking. I could feel that huge hand on my back. The thing is, he was totally, totally there. He was always totally there. So he was private, but he very much enjoyed one-on-one conversations. And Sue and I, the two of us, would literally come home sometimes, and we'd find our friends in the house with our dad, because our friends had independent relationships with our father. And I think some of these were just like completely joyful, and some of these I think were important beyond just the joy of them. But what a treat to enter the house like that. I appreciate that he showed his belief in others, and he made efforts on their behalf. And then the third point, of course, about being genuine. My mother offered a story, which I think many of you, if you don't know the story, you will recognize it in its essence. Apparently, when he first joined the Air Force, he arrived at Westover Air Force Base. That's where I was born. So he's driving up to the base, I guess, with my mom in the car, and he gets to the kind of checkpoint tower, the little checkpoint with the soldiers there in it, and he drove right on past and right on through, and they kind of flipped out, apparently, just aghast, and blew the whistle and like, back into the car, back it. And he kind of was confused, and I guess he brought the car back. He had forgotten to salute. Now, he wouldn't have known to salute, or he may have forgotten to salute, or maybe he was just being a little counterculture. But I can see the scene unfolding. Now, I'm making this up, of course, but I can see the scene unfolding. He probably gave him that entirely honest sparkle in his eye, did a not quite right salute. I can't quite even imagine what that first one would have looked like. And then he probably went on into the base with a tight, mischievous grin in the corner of his mouth. I think you have all seen that. The thing is, he didn't know exactly how to be. And that's part of how he knew exactly how to be. In other words, maybe said more simply, the guy you met, that was the guy. That was totally him. One more story, and then I'll close with two short segments. In my backyard, there stand 2 dawn redwood trees. We planted the first dawn redwood tree when I went off to school, when I was 6 years old, into a kindergarten, or 5. And then we planted the next one 3 years later when Susie went off to school. And every year we took the kind of quintessential start of school photo in front of one of those redwood trees. So it invites the question, of course, and we asked him this, why dawn redwoods? Now, it's interesting because he answered with a many-layered answer. I'm not sure that he planned the many-layered answer. Maybe he did. He was too subtle for me to actually know at this point. But the answer had lots in it. Why dawn redwoods? The reason he said was this. They have color in the winter. And they're extremely hard, but they have very soft bark. And they grow absolutely straight up, upright. The trees conveyed his values. So I'm very grateful. I'm going to close by telling 2 short pieces. 1, my father would put me on his knee and would put Susie on his knee, sometimes together, sometimes individually, and he'd read to us, as people read to their children, with his you know this voice, that very peaceful, easy, slow, vibrating voice, one that I did not clearly inherit, although I aspire to it. I tried to do the same thing with my boys, to read to them when they were very little. But then, in a true testimony to my father, as they entered middle school, we started a 4-year reading journey where I would read them first The Hobbit and then Lord of the Rings. We included James, who was repeatedly scared by the stories, but we included him, and we read through these 4 years. And as we got towards the end of their 8th grade, before they entered high school, we were completing the final part of Lord of the Rings, and reached a segment which I think perfectly describes my father. Some of you will recognize this. And the segment goes like this, from J.R.R. Tolkien in The Return of the King. It is not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set, uprooting the evil in the fields that we know, so that those who live after may have clean earth to till. What weather they shall have is not ours to rule. Mike Hirsh. So I'm very grateful for that and for this last one. So many times, and so many important times, my father would sit next to me and would sit next to Susie in temple. In fact, in this temple, often sort of right back there where Phyllis Kasdan is making it beautiful, right back there. We would sit, and there'd be a moment in the service, and this happened so many times when we were here, a moment that he repeated many, many times, and I totally understood. In fact, even before I could understand, I understood. At one point in the Torah service, he would lean over. It was kind of a little awkward lean, like a big bump. He'd throw his prayer shawl, his tallis, around me, place that huge, thick hand on my back, sometimes actually with a thud, because he wanted me to remember, and I do remember. So I will try to do it. I'll try to do it for you now. I'll do my best. Allison, you sung beautifully, so it won't be that good, but I will try. It would be like this. Eitz chaim hi lama kazikim ba. Little lean. V'tom chea meushar. Heavier lean on me. Dirachea darchei noam. Boom. There's the hand on my back. V'chol netivotea. Shalom. His voice was very low, so this part he really tried to embellish with the low part. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha v'nashuva. And then I have to concede one thing here, which is, as a teenager, this next part got really loud from right back there, and it was hard, I think. I felt a little embarrassed. Now, I take great pride in it, so I'm going to give it a go. Chadesh, Chadesh Yameinu, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. It is a tree of life for those who hold fast to it, and all who uphold it are blessed. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. Help us turn to you, and we shall return. Renew our lives as in days of old. Thank you, Dad. I love you. Oh, I love you. Oof. And I am very grateful. And as you said to me so many times, I now return to you. Well done, Hershey. I'm proud of you.
Thank you so much for that gift that you've shared with all of us. Susie, I would invite you to come forward and share at this time.
Hi, I'm Susie. Mike Hirsh was my dad. And thank you for saying hi to Auntie Sandy and everyone watching too. Thank you all for being here, both in person and virtually. Dad would have loved to see you all. Though let's be honest, he'd prefer to chat with each of you individually in a quiet space to find out how you really were. He genuinely cared. Dad was mindful before mindfulness was trendy. He noticed things. He saw beauty everywhere, in people and in the natural world, in my mom, in his children and grandchildren, sister, parents, extended family, in the faces and voices of kids, in the sounds of Dave and my friends' voices, permeating our home, many of whom are here or listening. In nature of all its forms, lions on safari, hawks soaring in the sky, trees blowing in the breeze, flowers blooming, in photographs, music, and in quiet moments. He was so good at stopping, listening, and noticing. In the spirit of my dad, I'd love for us all to just take our own quiet moment and picture something that we see as beautiful. I hope that whatever you pictured brought you comfort and brought a smile to your face. That's what Dad would have wanted. He enjoyed the quiet moments of reflection. If you bear with me one more time, could you picture one more thing? Take a moment to picture my sweet dad. Whatever image you have of him, whether it was from long ago or just weeks ago. Actually, take a moment, I'll do it too. I'm not sure what you envision, but I'll tell you what I see. I see Dad's twinkling, slightly mischievous eyes, a warm and genuine smile that put people at ease, sometimes unruly hair and eyebrows. His head tilted, thick hands, and a spirit that radiated warmth and love. I'd invite you to hold on to that image as I share. I hope to capture my dad with 3 ideas or 3 images: heart, hands, and voice. A heart filled with love, empathy, and joy. Hands capable, loving, comforting, and expressive. And a voice that was deep, calm, and full of wisdom. Heart. I found something last night Dad wrote of his own father, my grandpa Sam. He wrote, "Good Sam, gentle Sam, honest Sam, and sensitive Sam. I'll add, and loving Sam." It's no wonder Dad was able to love easily and wholly. He had a heart of gold and was a big teddy bear. Heart. Dad had many loves. One of those loves was for my mom, Carol. He adored her and never left her side, through thick and thin. They acted like newlyweds for all of their 58 years together. My entire life, Dave and I regularly witnessed my dad patting my mom's behind or gazing lovingly at her with his sweet smiling eyes. As a kid, we rolled our eyes witnessing this. As an adult, we both realize how rare and beautiful this is. Dad's love for Mom knew no bounds. It was the stuff of fairy tales and legends. His heart overflowed with love for Dave and me as well, and he readily showed it to us in so many ways. He told us daily that he loved us. As you said, he left nothing on the mat. He showed up and was fully present. He was always there for us, cheering us on at a BHS sporting event. Go Q, go Hershey! Enjoying nightly family dinners, helping us with homework at the kitchen table, patiently while one of us struggled with biology. You can guess who that was. Supporting and advising us, and tucking us in at night with a Schlafgesund and Lila Tov. Sleep well, Q, sleep well, Hershey. He managed to always be present while having a full-time medical practice. He'd rearrange his schedule so he could be at every important activity. I recently learned on many nights Dad would come home, spend time with us as a family, and then go back to work to finish his paperwork once we were all tucked in bed. He valued family and showed it. His heart had room for many, and he loved his big sister and extended family, as well as his patients, medical students, our friends, and his and Mom's friends and neighbors, and more recently, his beloved caregivers. He loved them all and genuinely cared about each of them, you, and you, delighting in your joys and successes. Every note from a patient, student, or loved one filled his heart. He loved nature and taught my brother and me to appreciate the natural world. On weekends, we'd often do family days in nature, digging fossils in old riverbeds. Rob Simon joined us sometimes too there. Hiking and skiing in Mendon Ponds Park, feeding chickadees out of our hands with outstretched arms like some Disney movie. Polishing rocks we collected at Ward's Rock Shop, growing vegetables in our garden, planting trees and flowers together. He loved being outside, and he instilled that love in us. His heart was also full of joy. Dad was flat out fun, and he loved to play. Whether it was throwing a football at Dave or me, or pitching a baseball in our backyard, playing tennis, doing the crossword puzzles or jumbles. Dad enjoyed a good time. He was known to cheat mercilessly in Scrabble. I can't tell you how many times I said things like, "Dad, qualler is not a word," to which he would reply with a quivering lip, innocent eyes, and a pre-laugh squeak in the back of his throat that qualler was indeed one who qualled. "Look it up," he'd dare me, handing me the Webster's Dictionary. Dad loved a good joke. Most of them I can't tell here. Every time we ordered Chinese food, he would open up his fortune and say, as if for the first time, "I don't believe it. It says, 'Help, I'm a prisoner in a fortune cookie factory.'" Never got old for him. When April Fool's Day came around, Dad always had something up his sleeve. One year, as I was heaping spoonfuls of sugar onto my Cheerios, Dad told me I might want to lay off the sugar. After my first bite, I realized why. He'd replaced the sugar with salt in the sugar bowl. Then there was the time he short-sheeted Dave and my beds and waited in the wings for our reaction. We did get him back by putting a rubber band on the spray. If you guys remember the old time sprays, we put a rubber band, and so that when someone turned the water on, it would shoot directly at you. And listened for his reaction. From another room, we heard Dad yell, "What idiot put the rubber band on the spray?" Then he calmly wiped his face, shook his head from side to side, and belly laughed. He was a good sport. Dad's heart was full of empathy and unconditional love. While visiting a few months ago, I was struggling with something, and he put his strong hand on my back, rested his head on my shoulder, and said, "Oh, Q, I just wish I knew how to make it better." And then right then and there, he did. He had. He always seemed to know just what to say or do to make us feel better. A big hand, paw, on my back, a gentle scratch or brushing of hair, a hug, or just a listening ear. He was sensitive, attuned, and understood me in a way that no one else did. I'm so grateful for that, and I'll miss it so much. Hands. Dad had big, thick, dare I say beefy hands, and they conveyed so much feeling. His thunderous claps could be heard for miles from the sidelines and stands of BHS soccer, football, softball, and wrestling events, and conveyed his enthusiasm and love of seeing us and our friends play. Those same big hands could swaddle a baby in 10 seconds flat, so that even Houdini himself couldn't have escaped. Those capable hands held hundreds upon hundreds of babies, gently and gingerly and confidently, without dropping them. As far as we know. You might have other stories. Hilariously, these same hands that so confidently held children would often drop the phone while hanging it up after answering an on-call, upon which Dad would declare, "That's why I'm not a surgeon." And back in the days when we shook hands, Dad would lean in and give you a sincere, "Great to see you" handshake and squeeze. Though large, those beefy hands enjoyed nimbly shaping bonsai trees, trimming and making cuttings of plants, and cultivating beautiful gardens. He loved to dig in his garden and get his paws and fingernails covered in soil. He was known to play in his garden for hours, digging, creating, and cultivating beauty. He loved recalling how when Dave and I were little, he used those big hands to teach us how to gently press the pea seeds into the ground to just the right depth with one finger and then tuck them in. And those hands expressed much warmth and love through hearty handshakes, a strong arm around the shoulder, pats on the back, and loving touches and bear hugs. He loved to use his hands and his head to try and fix things, anything. And he believed that anything could be fixed with just the right amount of rubber cement. He led us to believe that any problem could be solved if you just used your head. Like that time the Bills game wasn't on TV in our area because it failed to sell out, Dad just would not accept that. So in our family room, he rigged aluminum foil on an antenna, and we all hovered around to watch Frank Reich lead the Bills to a victory from a channel out of Syracuse. With Dad, anything was possible. And lastly, his voice. His beautiful, low voice. Shared much wisdom over the years. Here's just a few highlights. Even a fish wouldn't get caught if it kept its mouth shut. One I wish I heeded a bit more often. No big whoops, reminding us not to take ourselves too seriously. When Dave and I needed to make a decision, he'd remind us, "You have to look at that face you shave in the morning, in the mirror," reminding us that at the end of the day, we needed to be able to live with ourselves, no matter what we decided. Make sure to leave a good name, which I think he did. And when we were sad or worried, Dad would say, "Don't worry. The sun will still come up tomorrow," reminding us that no matter how bad things seemed, it would be okay. My dad was one of the most beautiful, loving, kind, generous, genuine people I've ever known. He saw beauty everywhere and created beauty everywhere. He made this world a kinder, gentler, and happier place by being in it. It's an honor to have known him and to be his daughter. I'm so proud of you, Dad. And I love you more than I could ever express. I'll miss your big, warm Hershey bear hugs, your hands, your heart, your voice, your empathy, your everything. As devastated as I am that I've lost one of my best friends, my sweet, beloved dad, I can feel his strong arms around me and hear his voice loudly and clearly. Don't worry, Q. The sun will still come up tomorrow. And when it does, as it will, I'll see my dad with his signature warm smile, tilted head, and twinkling eyes saying, I told you so. I love you, Dad. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the beautiful gift of those words. Let's take a moment and let them rest upon our hearts with a moment of our own meditations. Friends, we now turn generation to generation. Mike was blessed with 5 grandsons. His oldest 3 grandsons will come forward now and share some reflections with us.
I'm Samuel, this is Joseph, and this is James, and we are Grandpa's first batch of grandchildren. As his grandchildren, we are the experts and grateful beneficiaries of what might have been Grandpa's greatest role, a grandfather. Grandpa did many great things in his life, and he is a role model for us. He was also the best playmate for us kids. He knew that the best toys are big spoons, pots, pans, masses of cords and coasters, shovels, dirt buckets, hoses, batteries, tape, rubber bands, and paper clips. Grandpa also loved to laugh, and his laugh was so cute. Grandpa was adorable. We would all be eating dinner together, and while everyone else was talking, he would bide his time, and then out of nowhere, he would drop something very subtle that was the seed of a funny story. He would begin to tell the story, and then he would crack himself up, and as the chuckling began, he would start to bounce up and down with barely contained laughter, so much so that he had to pause his story, and then he would manage to continue for a bit more, and then he'd be overcome by wheezing laughter again, and it was this crescendoing cycle of talk, laugh, pause, laugh, talk. And then he would end by winking at the person across the table who inspired the tale. As a role model for us, Grandpa was mischievous and would just make things up. For example, while playing Scrabble, there are no English words with 3 X's and 6 Q's, and no vowels. But Grandpa would insist that was a word, and he would go to great lengths to provide the etymology and definitions of the word while laughing the entire time, which is not very convincing. He would also tell us preposterous stories. Like one story of a man who snuck a goose into a movie theater in his pants, and he explained in great detail how the goose's head emerged from the man's fly. It ate popcorn from the neighbor's popcorn bucket. Imagine that. Grandpa taught us a lot about the natural world beyond geese. He taught us to notice and appreciate the little things around us. When we went to Mendon Ponds, he would share his extensive knowledge about topography, geology, and glaciers. In the summers, we would pick the black raspberries together in the backyard. He would explain that certain plants were gone because of the deer, or whatever natural phenomena had transpired that year. He would point out the birds and what species they were. This past July, we sat outside on the deck for hours, staring out at the bird feeder. He narrated the action, totally content. He would ask us to get the bird cookie to place in the bird feeder to attract the next aviary scene. Of course, we all know that Grandpa was a master gardener. What you might not know is that as children, we would apprentice him. He would walk about the yard with his cane, not for balance, but rather to whack the trees and shrubs at the precise point that they needed pruning. We would scurry after him with the loppers and clippers to diligently do his bidding. He was deservedly proud of his garden at Chautauqua, and even when he couldn't physically do the gardening himself, with great pride, he would go out, water the garden, and teach us about all the plants. He also taught us how to fish. Every time we caught one, he would tell us the precise history of the species, and somehow, that particular fish. One thing we will always remember about Grandpa is his hands. He had big hands, and when he would shake our hand or hold it, it was a hug for your hand, a hand hug, if you will. Grandpa was pretty handy, and he would jump at the chance to fix things, which was great, because we would break things. Although sometimes, despite his passion to help, his hands were just so big that they were a liability for the project. While he would make a poor violinist, those hands comforted us. He made us feel known and loved for who we are.
Grandpa, we will always remember and strive to live the example you've set for us, your capacity to nurture. We can't remember what Grandpa was like with us when we were babies, but we did witness him making Benjamin and Gabriel happy. When they were crying, he would make them stop and laugh like no one else. We know he did that for us too. We will remember your patience with us, nothing in a hurry, as you would say. The way you lived your life taught us about what it means to be successful. It's not about grades or promotions at work or how much money you make, but rather about how your plants grow, how many birds you spotted that day, or how you spend time with family and friends and do good work in the world. So we will think of you anytime we see a beautiful bird, when we see a nice tree or a deer in the field, whenever we see someone folding their pizza, we will think of you. Whenever we see someone put a huge amount of ketchup on anything or everything, we will think of you, our loving, caring grandfather. Grandpa gave us self-confidence. He showed up for everything that he could, coming to milestone events at school and scheduling trips to Boston in order to see us play soccer. Just knowing he was there, seeing him smiling in the crowd or on the sidelines made us feel good. Grandpa, you are such a wonderful man that we are able to go through life with a certain self-confidence. Though no matter who we are or what we do, just by being your grandchildren, we can feel pride.
Thank you, Samuel, Joseph, and James, for your beautiful words. I'd now turn to Charles, to Mike's son-in-law, to share a reflection with us.
Excuse me. I really have to follow those boys, huh? My name is Charles Glick. Mike Hirsh was my father-in-law, and I'm here to speak for our two boys, 4.5-year-old Benjamin and 3.5-year-old and three-year-old Gabriel. Unlike their very articulate and humorous older cousins, they yet don't have the words to describe what their grandfather meant to them. Sue recently brought home a book from the library that we have been reading to Ben and Gabe that to me captures the essence of Mike Hirsh and what made him so special to my boys and to so many others. The Rabbit Listened tells the story of a little boy named Taylor who is filled with pride after building an extraordinary tower out of blocks. When the tower is suddenly destroyed by several swooping crows, his animal friends all think they know how to help. First comes a chicken that wants to talk, talk, talk. Next comes a bear who gets angry and shouts about it. After that comes a procession of animals who all have ideas about what to do about the fallen blocks. But Taylor didn't feel like doing anything with anybody. When he feels hopeless, a little rabbit enters. Let me quote from the book. Of course, Dave quotes from Tolkien. I'm quoting from a children's book about a rabbit. Very, very appropriate. In the quiet, Taylor doesn't even notice the rabbit, but it moved closer and closer until Taylor could feel its warm body. Together, they sat in silence until Taylor said, "Please stay with me." The rabbit listened. The rabbit listened as Taylor talked. The rabbit listened as Taylor shouted. The rabbit listened as Taylor remembered. And through it all, the rabbit never left. And when Taylor was ready, the rabbit offered a hug. All the rabbit does is listen, which it turns out is just what Taylor needed. Like the rabbit in the story, Mike had a way of conveying love and empathy quietly without having to say a word. Our sons Benjamin and Gabriel sensed that from their earliest days. You can't fool kids. There was something magical about my father-in-law. They were drawn to him. He wasn't loud or quick to force a relationship. Rather, he sat back and listened and was physically and emotionally present. He waited for them to come to him when they were ready. Benjamin, our 4.5-year-old, has always had a special bond with Grandpa. He never wanted to be too far from him. If Grandpa was brushing his teeth, Ben was right there by his side. If Grandpa was headed to the bathroom, Ben was right behind. When Grandpa crawled into bed, Ben climbed onto the bed next to him and draped his little arms around Grandpa's belly. He always found comfort in being near Grandpa. Over the last 20 months, we split our time between our home in Cambridge and Grandpa and Grandma's house, and I'm so grateful that our children got to spend hours of quality time with them. Grandpa Mike delighted in spending time with his grandchildren and was a gift to our boys and to us all. When we pulled into 30 Branch Ave, usually well after midnight, the kids couldn't contain their excitement. They were giddy. There was no place on earth that they would rather be. They couldn't wait to come downstairs to say good morning to Grandma and Grandpa and to hear Grandpa say, "Hi." I can't do it. I can't do it the way he does. It breaks my heart to know that they will never hear that wonderful, sweet, loving voice again. It's heartbreaking that they won't grow up with their beloved grandpa present the way Sam, Joseph, and Jamie have. But in their short time together, we're grateful they knew and loved each other so well. Both boys will carry Grandpa in their hearts, and with the aid of pictures and videos, we will remember all the wonderful times we had together, picking blueberries, peaches, and apricots, walks in Mendon Ponds and Highland Park, feeding chickadees, sitting on Grandpa's lap reading books or watching videos of wood chippers, holding his big hands, snuggling on the couch, and just being near him. Mike's ability to convey warmth and empathy wasn't limited to his grandchildren. Like the rabbit in the story, my father-in-law would get close to people and listen, really listen. Mike had a way of putting aside his needs and giving you his full attention, no matter your age or station in life. The many beautiful people loving people who cared for him in these past few years can attest to this. He had a genuine interest and concern for each of them, and with his trademark loving smile and warm, sensitive eyes, he would ask about them and their families. I recall many mornings waking up early and coming downstairs to see him sitting with one of his caregivers, being physically and emotionally present as they shared a bit of their own lives and stories with him. It's no wonder they all loved him deeply and why so many of them wanted to be here today. Thank you for taking such great care of him. There is no question that these precious few months would not have been possible without all of you. Nearly every interaction I had with my father-in-law was filled with his unique ability to listen, empathize, and accept you, faults and all, except maybe when I would forget to shut the lights off in the basement. Whether it was at the kitchen table asking about my work, or my early morning bike rides to Mendon Ponds, or just noticing that I was sad or anxious about something, he conveyed a depth of care that I haven't experienced from anyone other than my own late father. I can still feel the loving embrace as we hugged goodbye as we were leaving from our last visit. Not a formal handshake between son-in-law and father-in-law, but a big, beautiful, warm, and loving hug that made you feel amazing. I already miss him terribly, and I always will. I love you, Dad.
Thank you so much. Let's take a few moments for one more opportunity to meditate and reflect in our own way. Friends, it's not lost on me that we gather together for this sacred farewell during the festival of Hanukkah. There is a famous debate between two of the ancient rabbis about how to light the Hanukkah menorah. The first, Hillel, said that we should start with an empty menorah and add one light each day. The second, Shammai, taught that we should start with a full menorah with all 8 lights burning and light one fewer candle each day, so the final day of the holiday has one solitary light burning. The dominant practice is, of course, that of Hillel, teaching that we should increase our light each day of the holiday. I think of both of these teachings as we gather together today to remember and honor Mike Hirsh. It is most fitting that we are here during the days of Hanukkah, the festival of lights. For Mike was someone who created great light, hope, and joy in his life. He was a positive and healing presence in so many ways. Just as this holiday teaches us about resilience, Mike's life was filled with beautiful resilience and strength. Mike's life as an extraordinary pediatrician and as a devoted family man, was one that followed the teaching of Hillel. From his childhood in small-town North Adams, Mike continued to grow and learn and add achievements in each chapter of his life. His light burned brighter and brighter with each passing year. At the same time, Mike showed us the power and wisdom in Shammai's teaching. If we think back to the Maccabees re-entering the temple in Jerusalem, they found one flask of oil. They had faith and courage, one might even say audacity, and they lit that menorah immediately. They didn't wait until they manufactured more oil as a safeguard. They were confident in God's saving presence. And the miracle was that the menorah remained full day after day. Mike created a strong foundation and allowed everyone in his orbit to go from strength to strength. He watched over his patients, he took care of his family, he enjoyed many passions in life. He saw light even in dark places. And he made that life burn brighter and brighter through his kind and loving spirit. His optimism and generosity have touched many lives and have impacted our community in ways that will not be forgotten. Eternal God, source of blessing, bless all those who mourn on this day. Bless Carol on this hardest day. May the memory of the love you shared be a blessing and a comfort. Bless Sandra and Sanford and Marjorie. May you find consolation as you mourn, remembering the special moments of connection with your beloved Mike. From generation to generation, bless David and Allison, Susie and Charles, Samuel, Joseph, James, Benjamin, and Gabriel. Your father and grandfather's fierce pride in you will endure. You will carry his example far into the future, and that is his legacy. Eternal God, bless all those who mourn today. Just as Mike brought healing and hope and light and love into this world, so too may we be blessed to follow his example. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of this good and righteous man endure as a blessing, and may he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. I ask us to rise as we're able in body or spirit for the recitation of the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen B'Miromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Utehorim, Kezohar Harakia Masirim, Et Nishmat Michael Gershon ben Shmuel Halevi Urivka Shehalach La'olamo Ba'al Harachamim Yastirehu Beseter Kenafav Le'olamim V'yitzror B'yitzror HaChayim Et Nishmato Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar Amen. God of abundant mercy, God most high, may the soul of our loved one, our beloved Michael Hirsh, who has gone into eternity, find the gift of perfect peace in your embrace, together with the holy and pure, whose light shines like the radiance of heaven. Compassionate God, hold him close to you forever, so that his soul may be bound up in the bond of life eternal. May he find a home with you, O God, and may he rest in peace. And together we say, Amen. As our service here in the sanctuary comes to a close, I ask that you remain standing out of respect as the casket is taken from the sanctuary. Those of you who have been honored as pallbearers today, please come to the front corner of the sanctuary. Our funeral directors will provide us with instructions going forward.